Well, good afternoon to you. 406 now, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up this hour, General Keith Kellogg will be with us. We'll talk about what's happening in the Middle East right now, U.S. military involvement, to the extent that that's going to occur. Some ships, of course, headed to the Eastern Mediterranean, and how Joe Biden's handling everything. We'll get into the details there. And then Chuck Ross is here from the Washington Free Beacon at 5 o'clock. You can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. One of the things we'll talk about with Chuck is this Bob Menendez news today. You see the New Jersey Democrat, Senator Bob Menendez, has now yet another charge dropped on him and his wife. They're being accused of being foreign agents now. Photos show him meeting with Egyptian officials. Pictures released by the feds Thursday, the New York Post reports, show New Jersey Senator Bob Menendez and his wife meeting with Egyptian officials as the pair were hit with fresh charges of illegally acting as foreign agents of the country while allegedly pocketing hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of gold bars and other bribes. He is, again, a cartoon villain, this guy. He keeps his riches in gold bars and he stitches it inside of his suits inside of his house. Menendez, his wife Nadine, and Egyptian-born New Jersey businessman Wael Hana are now formally charged with helping the veteran Democrat, already accused of secretly lobbying his colleagues to unfreeze $300 million in military aid meant for the Cairo government, act on behalf of Egypt without disclosing it to the U.S. government. Oh, he was doing Egypt's bidding as a top Democrat senator, the head of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. It's about as powerful as it gets in the Senate. The updated indictment includes explosive details regarding an alleged May 2019 meeting in which the senator met in his Washington, D.C. office with an Egyptian intelligence official to discuss Congress's response to revelations that an American citizen had been seriously hurt by an Egyptian airstrike in 2015. At the time, some members of Congress were objecting to the U.S. providing Egypt with military aid due to the attack, according to court papers unsealed in Manhattan federal court today. Shortly after the meeting, which was also attended by Nadine, that is Menendez's new wife, and Hannah, the Edgewater, New Jersey businessman accused of being a middleman between the Menendez couple and Egyptian officials, the senators searched the web for information about the airstrike and Americans' injuries. Court papers said, they found his internet search history. They were able to connect him very easily to this plot. A week later, the same Egyptian agent texted Hannah that Menendez, quote, would sit very comfortably if he helped resolve the matter. Consider it done, Hannah replied. Nadine Menendez also deleted her texts. This is a common feature of this Menendez indictment. All of the indictments against him so far include that he and his wife were deleting all of the texts related to their crimes. Might be a little bit of evidence of consciousness of guilt now. About the airstrike episode, which included screenshots of the U.S. citizen's attorney's claims about the events, the court papers said. So there you go. There was a lot going on here. Remember in the other indictment, they said that Menendez had this deal where he was making a ton of cash. His family was making a ton of cash because they had established a monopoly on U.S. food exports to Egypt, that they have to be halal certified, and the only company that could do the halal certification was the one that was connected to Bob Menendez, and it cost a lot of money for these food companies to be able to become halal certified to send their food to Egypt, and Menendez and his wife were apparently, according to the feds, pocketing a ton of cash from this little arrangement. And people sit back and they wonder, how do these lawmakers get so rich? How do they get so rich? I don't know if all of them are as explicitly corrupt as Bob Menendez, but he is a masterclass in D.C. corruption. Now, I know they're saying, look, he's a powerful senator. Justice is finally being served. Just imagine if he was the vice president of the United States. Just imagine what you would do with that kind of awesome power, vice president of the United States. It's a good thing that's never happened, that some vice president was using his power in a corrupt way to enrich his family. Thank goodness, I'm glad these are just one-offs like Bob Menendez. We can finally catch the bad guys, and then we can convince the public that we really are going after these evildoers who are sometimes inside of our government. It's so unfortunate, but Thank goodness our justice system is intact and going after the bad guys here. So more on Bob Menendez coming up as I talk to Chuck Russ on that subject. Meanwhile, I mentioned Israel. I want to talk about guns in Israel. There is one of the features of this terrorist attack in Israel was that there weren't guns firing back, not many at least, on the terrorists. And it's strange. Remember that the movie from the 1980s, Red Dawn, where the Russians land in an American town and American high schoolers have to take up arms against a Russian invasion, and long guns, they're firing back on the Russians. And you think, look at what happened in southern Israel. You have people terrorists flying across the border, essentially in parachutes, paragliders, landing upon this concert scene, and they're helpless. They're running for their lives. They've been up all night at a concert. They're running for their lives as they're under attack, under siege. They're kidnapped, mutilated, murdered, defenseless. And here in the United States, for those of us who, value our God-given right to self-defense and certainly have enshrined that in the Second Amendment, a lot of us have been like, how could that happen? And why, especially with such bloodthirsty enemies on your door? It's not some sort of surprise. It wasn't like, oh my gosh, Hamas wants to kill Jews. They say it all the time. They want to get rid of Israel. You know that. You kind of think they'd have an armed population to fight back. Here's the update on this story. Fox News headline, Israelis pressure government to loosen restrictive gun laws amid Hamas war. It's a pity it came to this. Israeli citizens are urging the government to loosen the country's restrictive gun laws in the harrowing aftermath of Hamas's terror attack that massacred more than 1,200 Israelis and ignited a war in the region. Israeli residents are signing petitions, pressuring the government to allow them to take up personal arms as Israel prepares for a ground invasion of Gaza, the Times of Israel reported. More on that ground invasion coming up with General Kellogg here on the program, by the way. Firearm licensing in Israel is a point of contention in the country and has been regarded as excessively stringent for civilians. But activists say the events that transpired in the last week and the traumatic images of Hamas terrorists brutally murdering Israeli civilians in their homes should be cause to immediately loosen restrictions. Well, sure. Definitely. Quote, people are changing their opinion, and now there is more awareness, said Rabbi Raz Blizovsky, 32 years old, of Katrin, told the Times of Israel. Firearm licenses for private citizens in Israel are typically only granted to individuals who can prove a need for extra security in their line of work or daily life. All right, let me pause on that thought for a moment. Don't you kind of think everybody in Israel has a need for this kind of defense? In terms of, what's your need? I'm Israeli. That's my need. I'm a human being who would like to protect my family. That's my need. This whole this May issue situation, we have it here in the United States, and New York, thank God, lost a big Supreme Court case on this subject. But it really came down to how close are you to power? That was the only way that you were getting access to a gun in New York. Are you rich? Are you powerful? Are you well-connected? Sure, you can have a gun. The rest of you, pound sand. You can't get a gun. You can't protect yourself or your family. Typically only granted to individuals who can prove a need for extra security. One of the key qualifications for a private citizen to obtain a license to own a gun depends on where they live, the Times of Israel explains. Blizovsky takes issue with that logic. He said he can't understand why someone in Tel Aviv legally cannot get a pistol, but someone in the Golan can. Quote, there are terror attacks in both places, he told the outlet. He added that it's a, quote, pity that it took a devastating terror attack to wake up the country to the importance of personal protection for private citizens. Yeah, it is devastating, isn't it? Why do you have to let there be that much bloodshed first? Not that they were, quote, letting it happen, but why does that need to happen as a predicate for self-defense? You have to be aware of this. And the same is true in the United States. Are there people who want to do us harm? Well, yeah. We've experienced it, certainly in the course of our own lifetime. Far too many times, and certainly in a big, gigantic way on 9/11. The cartels are running roughshod over American southern border. Joe Biden has opened up the border to them. They are among the most soulless, destructive creatures on the planet. The things that some of these cartels and some of these so many of these south of the border cartels do to human beings, it's unspeakable. It's unspeakable. And some of it has shown up in American communities, including right here in our area. And so should people have the right to defend themselves? You're damn right they should. They should absolutely. They do have the right to defend themselves. And this, once again, this idea that, oh, well, guns are only for hunting and the deer aren't wearing Kevlar vests. It's so decadent and so reckless and so thoughtless and so ill-considered. The American people have a right to defend themselves against enemies, foreign and domestic. And God forbid that you see something happen here in the United States like just happened in Israel. I want American communities to be able to protect themselves. I've been involved with groups that have been talking about this issue for years. This is the Blazovsky says, this is the rabbi. He said he's been involved with these groups that have been talking about this issue for years. During calm times, people don't do anything, he said. Yeah, they grow complacent. That's true. That's true. And you start to think, well, nothing bad could ever happen because nothing bad has happened recently. So maybe nothing bad will ever happen again. You've got to be completely. You have to abandon your sense of history. You have to be completely ignorant of it to arrive at a conclusion like that. Hours after Hamas launched an attack on southern Israel on Saturday, Blazovsky started several messaging groups for Israelis in support of loosening restrictions for personal firearms. An online petition he created garnered 8,000 signatures in just 24 hours. 8,000, the outlets reported. A separate online petition, which calls on the Israeli government to grant, quote, a permit to carry a private weapon for anyone who has served in the IDF and has no criminal record, has gathered close to 22,000 digital signatures in 3 days. So that's an interesting detail there. When you have, all these adults, every Israeli citizen serves in the IDF. So there you go. The qualifications are there. You can get people armed up. You train them on how to use guns. They can use guns. There you go. They've even got additional training to do that. Blazovsky believes the atrocities committed by Hamas could have been avoided here if more Israelis had firearms. People all over the country have reached out to him, inquiring about the best way to obtain a license for personal protection. The main criterion, Blazovsky argues, is does that person have a criminal background? It's easy to give a weapon to someone who is trained in the IDF, but then if he is called to reserve duty, what does that help his family or community? Yeah, good point. They need to defend themselves too, including when their loved one deploys to defend their families and their country. National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir has long championed loosening Israel's gun laws. He told reporters earlier this year, when civilians have guns, they can defend themselves. On Sunday, Ben-Gvir posted on X, formerly Twitter, that he had directed the Firearms Licensing Division to, quote, go on an emergency operation in order to allow as many citizens as possible to arm themselves. Part of his plan to speed up these gun permits include a phone interview instead of a physical one for applicants who meet the criteria for carrying a private firearm and who don't have a criminal or medical record. If approved, they'll be able to receive permission to carry a firearm within a week, he wrote. Ben-Gvir has also said that citizens who had received a conditional permit to buy a firearm but did not do so will be able to purchase a firearm now without the need to submit another application if theirs has expired. The exemption will apply to about 4,000 citizens, he wrote. The Fox reports that currently only roughly 2% of the Israeli population owns guns. The number we had heard yesterday was 3%. Somewhere between 2 and 3% of Israelis own guns. That compares to about 30% of the population here in the United States. 30% of America, gun owners. In January, Israel announced it would speed up these gun applications in response to a shooting in East Jerusalem that left 7 people dead. Let me take a phone call here. I've got Bill calling in from Herndon now on line 5. Bill, good afternoon. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Hi, Vince. Hope you're doing well today. You basically just echoed what I was calling in about. If anybody wants to reference that article, that it was published in the online publication called AmmoLand yesterday.
Yeah.
Talking about Ben-Gvir trying to get 10,000 weapons out to civilian patrols. Apparently, you had more information than that. But the other comment I wanted to throw in is
Bill, I'll let you make your next comment too, Bill. But I actually didn't point this out. I'm glad you brought this up because I had seen that headline. I'm also seeing it in the Times of Israel now. Ben-Gvir says that 10,000 assault rifles have been purchased for civilian security teams. So this is the Israeli government looking to arm civilian security teams to protect people.
Well, God bless them. I wish our government would do the same thing. You were referencing Red Dawn, and great movie, the first one, anyway.
Yeah.
But the idea of our Second Amendment, as it is right now, is all well and good for those states that allow civilians to have firearms without having to give up the firstborn male child for them.
Right.
But right now, unless you got a Class 3 license, you're out there with a plinker fighting an invading army that's got full automatic weapons. And so something needs to be done about our interpretation of the Second Amendment.
Right, it's like highly restrictive for the ability for an American citizen here in the United States to get a fully automatic weapon right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for covering us. I appreciate it.
Yeah, Bill, thank you very much. No, good Bill adding an important point here that there is an effort now to arm civilians in Israel. And remember, it happened in Ukraine too. Remember what happened? After Russia invaded Ukraine, the Ukrainian government not only locked all the borders down to keep everybody in. They said all the men have to stay in the country. They began distributing weapons across the country and saying, okay, everybody's in the fight now, and you're all taking one. Coming up, General Keith Kellogg will be with us just moments from now. We're going to talk about U.S. military movements as it relates to what's happening in the Middle East, what comes next in that conflict. You've also got, of course, Israeli forces now preparing for a ground movement into Gaza. There's a lot going on. General Kellogg will give us the latest. That's ahead. Good afternoon to you. It's 4:35 here at News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up top of the hour, Chuck Ross from the Washington Free Beacon will be with us. The report from the White House today, an update on the number of Americans dead, the number of Americans still missing from the terrorist attack in Israel.
I'll start with the saddest of news. We can now update the number of Americans that we know have been killed to 27, and the number of unaccounted for stands today at 14.
The United States, as a part of its response, has been moving warships in the direction of the eastern Mediterranean to send a message to other would-be terrorists that the United States supports Israel. For more on this, I want to go to General Keith Kellogg, retired three-star Army general. He's also the co-chairman of the Center for American Security at the America First Policy Institute. Sir, good to have you back with us. Thank you.
Vince, thanks for having me. Good to be with you.
All right, so American warships on the move. I imagine any country seeing warships arrive would derive a message from that.
Yeah, anytime you put a carrier strike battle group, into waters like on the Eastern Mediterranean, it's pretty significant because just not the firepower it has like on airplanes from the carrier, but the fact is when you look at this on the forward strike group specifically, it's got 5 guided missile cruisers / destroyers. That means it's got about 400 Tomahawk land attack missiles on board, which are pretty good and pretty impressive. Pretty impressive in its lethality if they want to use it. And honestly, Vince, I think there's 2 reasons why it's there. It's one, it's a deterrence to tell people in the region, to include Iran, who don't get involved with this because we're out there and we can reach you from a long distance. And secondly, it's there to support. If we have to go after and try to find those 14 Americans that are now being held hostage with our Joint Special Operations Command, either SEAL Team 6 or the Delta Force, they're going to be there to provide some type of military support if that's needed. So there's a duality to it. And I think it sends a very clear message. We're the only nation that can field a carrier battle group like that. And I think everybody pays attention to that.
Yeah, there was. I did see that Israel, according to the Biden administration, they've been indicating that Israel is saying that they don't want other countries to send troops in. They're not asking for that. They say that they can do this, the Israeli military. Would that, in your view, preclude our special operations guys going in there for American hostage rescues?
No, I think there's a duality to this, Vince. Is one, they're saying don't get involved. We don't need your troops, and they never have. By the way, they've never said we want American troops on the ground. But to me, if you're the president of the United States, I don't care what any government says. If there are American citizens involved, we will use our forces if necessary to get those people out and rescue them if needed. And there is a joint special operations command and control element on the ground now in Israel, coordinating closely with the Israelis. But we don't need to ask anybody's permission to rescue an American. We'll go do it if we have to. And I think they recognize that. I've had the opportunity to train with Israeli Special Operations Forces and their special units for a long time. Years ago when I commanded special operations in Europe, they understand that what we're going to do, and they kind of back away and say, okay, over to you. They understand the power we can bring to it. So I wouldn't worry about that. I wouldn't be asking anybody's permission. I don't care if it was Switzerland. I don't care if it's Israel. We'll go get Americans as we should when needed and as needed.
There are plenty of reports now in every outlet that Israel is now assembling IDF reservists on the border with Gaza to prepare them for a ground assault into the region to go after these terrorists. The numbers that we heard earlier this week was that Israel was mobilizing some 300,000 reservists. Can you give us a sense of your view of this pending military operation and what we will be seeing in the days to come?
Yeah, I would tell the American public, you better steel yourself for some horrific scenes that you're going to see. And frankly, remember, this thing was started by Hamas when they did the incursion into Israel and attacked those settlements and killed those women, children, and men, some of them in a horrific fashion. And I would just tell everybody to understand that it's not going to be pretty what you're going to see. I don't think to a large degree they're going to put a large amount of forces. They're going to be very selective what they do. I will tell you the worst place that a military wants to fight is in a city, and especially if the city's been rubblized to any degree, because it eats troops up. What I mean by eats troops up, the amount of troops that you need to put on the ground is really, really pretty significant. And they don't want to go there. They don't want to have to do that.
Yes.
The Israeli military is not that large when you think about it. And I'll remind you that, when you go back to World War II with Stalingrad, that ate up about 800,000 German troops. And I see what they're doing in Gaza, which is basically the reduction of the city. Not unusual. We did it in the Civil War when Grant sent Sherman to the sea and they burned the city of Atlanta. And we did it in World War II with Dresden when we firebombed it, and also Nagasaki and Hiroshima. It's not going to be pretty.
Yes.
And you're just going to sit back and watch it.
Additionally, I was talking to, my father is a Marine, retired, and we were talking about in the early 2000s, of course, you had the battles of Fallujah, where you had soldiers and Marines going block by block in this urban environment, and it was some of the roughest fighting of the entire war there in Iraq. And my guess is that Israel is going to draw some lessons from all of this as they try and get into Gaza City and root out these terrorists.
Yeah, this is just – they're going to have to be very, very selective and discreet about how they attack it. And by the way, remember, the Israelis probably are not exceptionally well trained in urban warfare because they haven't had to do it until the last time they did it when the north into Lebanon. And it takes a real special quality of fighting to fight in cities. I think they prefer to back off and use rockets and bombs to do it, to take out as needed Hamas leadership because it's just a tough fight. And I think they can do it. I think what you're going to see is a lot of destruction of the city of Gaza and try to force them back. They actually drive the civilians in towards Egypt if they want to. But it's going to be brutal. And I'm just absolutely convinced they don't want to have to go in on the ground because when I was a commander years ago in the invasion of Panama, we had to go into Cologne on the Atlantic side, and I only had a brigade at the time, and it ate up a brigade. I mean, it just absorbs troops, and you just don't want to have to do it. So they're going to do something different. But I think they're going to be very discreet about it. You're not going to see what I'd call a massive invasion of the Israelis going into Gaza. If they do, the results are going to be horrific. They can't afford to take the casualties. When you look at the amount of people they lost, let's just say 1,000 right now on the attack last Saturday, there's an equivalence there. If this was the United States, that would have been roughly 23,000 American citizens killed. And, they can't afford to lose that many ground troops, and especially if they have to look to the north as well, because they've got Hezbollah up there in the north, and they don't want to have to fight a two-front war unless absolutely necessary. They've done it before, but it's not easy, and I think they want to focus in on Gaza right now.
Yes. So right now, this this intervening time between the terrorist attack and the big response from from the IDF going into the Gaza Strip, there must be an immense amount of preparation going on right now, surveillance of the battlefield and assessing how exactly they're going to take it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, but part of that is, the intelligence prep of the battlefield. Well, that's something we've always done. It's what they do, too, as a first-rate military. And you have to do that. They'll do drones. They'll do overhead. They'll do satellite technology. And I'm really hoping that we are providing them as much of that as we can because, our intelligence is exquisite in what we can do. And they're going to have to do that to map it out. This is one of those things I think you're going to have to go back and look at the end of this thing is how did they not pick up on this? And I think what they did, my belief is they went back to the old rudimentary way we used to do things when you plan something. You do it by paper, you do it by courier, you do it face-to-face, because they know how good signals intelligence, electronic intelligence, even human intelligence is. And nobody appears right now to have picked up on this. And that means they went back to the old school of doing business. So I think they have to think hard about that. They have to think about how they're going to use intelligence to the best degree possible, and they're going to have to be very discreet about it. And they're probably preparing as best as they can on what we used to call IPB, intelligence prep of the battlefield. But they better have good intelligence wherever they go because there's going to be a cost on this, and the cost is going to be in lives, both civilian lives and military lives as well.
You mentioned a moment ago that I forget the term you used, but you basically said that Israel is essentially a first-rate military. What kind of the terrorists of Hamas, what are they going up against? I mean, how different are these two fighting forces?
Well, it's basically irregular warfare against a conventional force, and that's when you looked at what Hamas did. And by the way, what they did was horrific, but they planned that in it was well planned. When you think about it, this is what drives somebody like me nuts, because what they did is when they attacked, they neutralized the three Israeli military outposts that were there by a direct attack. Therefore, it froze them in place. And then what they did is they went towards the civilian communities in the centers and attacked them. And they attacked them by the air, those paragliders. They attacked them they tried to attack by sea, and they attacked by ground. And so you look at it and you go, okay, this was for irregular forces, there was a relatively sophisticated attack. That means somebody had to help them plan it, how to think their way through it, because Hamas, generally speaking, doesn't do it. This was an attack into Israeli territory, something they had not done in force before. They may have done pinprick attacks, but nothing this major. And it was a coordinated attack, meaning they fired rockets at the same time they were going by ground, sea, and air. So I looked, and they say, well, there was no direct involvement by Iran. And I was like, no, there was no emails. But I will tell you that I'm sure they had some support from the Quds Force of Iran on how they did this, how they planned for it, how they executed it as well. They just didn't come out of the blue and say this was an attack. But it's an irregular force against a conventional force. But then they retreat to the cities, and that's when they have to go block by block. So it's an irregular fight. It's a tough fight. It's hard to do it, but the Israelis are going to have to do it. They're going to have to root them out.
Yeah, no question. And it makes a big difference if it's your home community. You know the turf, you know how to maneuver through it, and it makes it difficult for the Israelis as they go to root out the people who killed their people. It's just, I can't imagine what comes next here. On that issue, General Kellogg, it must be interesting, strange to see how things have changed in terms of our ability to see the images of war so quickly. It used to be that we would hear stories of the guys who went to war and come back. Some of them would tell those stories, many others wouldn't. Nowadays, the images are available for all to see pretty quickly. That must be a very bizarre phenomenon to see, sir.
Well, you know something, honestly, Vince, I don't think that's bad. It is. It's unusual to see. But, I'm reminded of what Robert E. Lee said at the end of the Civil War when he made that comment, I'm glad war is so ugly, otherwise we'd become too fond of it.
Yes.
And I think it's good that Americans see the brutality of what we saw. And that's you have to accept the fact with cell phones and with basically movie cameras out there and the news makers that are out there, I don't care what news network it is, that are bringing this right into your living room. And sometimes you have to tell American people, this is what the war is all about. This is a former soldier. This is when I tell people, this is why soldiers generally don't like to go to war, because it's brutal, it's hard, and it's vicious. And some of those scenes we're seeing, Vince, are absolutely horrific when you see what they've done to the young children and what they did to the women. But that's what war is all about, and it's ugly, and you shouldn't have to go there. But once you're engaged in it, you have to complete the action. You have to fight to the finish to do it, and they will. So there's a good part of it, and there's a bad part. The bad part is seeing what's happening, but the good party comes back and say, okay, when you commit a nation to war, when you fight, this is what it looks like, and you better steel yourself to it, because this is going to look like the end game, what's happening. So, and you're not going to get away from this, because everybody seems to have a cell phone right now, and you're going to see images like this coming out. And that's when I said earlier, you better steel yourself, because you're going to see these images coming up in the next day, the next week, or the next month, and they're not going to be pretty, but be ready for them.
General Kellogg, finally, and this may deserve a much longer conversation. So, if you can keep it brief, feel free, whatever you'd like to do. But I think one of the things that everyone's sort of on guard for is what comes next. So, not just, of course, Israel fighting back against the terrorists of Hamas, but whether or not this escalates into something much bigger and much uglier that involves a lot more countries, to include the United States. Is it possible for Israel to achieve its objectives of striking down Hamas here, pushing back on Iran's support for terrorism, and to keep this contained, to keep it from growing into something much bigger?
Yeah, I think it is, Vince. I think they can do it. I mean, that's the reason why, again, the Forward Carrier Strike Group is there, to remind everybody that potentially, that we could get involved in a larger scale. And the fact that the amount of civilians killed, there were Germans killed, there were Brits killed, there were French killed. This has kind of brought the world together. It's kind of telling everybody, knock it off now, and they're going to get involved now. People make mistakes, and people do dumb things, and people can have something like that happening, and there be an escalation. And escalation sometimes causes more problems. But I think that whole messaging out there, that I think this time everybody realizes how serious it is, and they're ready for it. I think we're ready for an escalation. I think the only escalation that would come would be from the north with Hezbollah, and that'd be Iranian supported. But this is when you tell Iran to knock it off, because they're the only primary actor in the region that can really affect that. The Syrians obviously want to be involved as well, but Assad's got his own problems right now. And I'd remind Turkey to kind of back off as well as a NATO friend, just to keep your mouth shut. But I think they can contain it right now, as long as nobody else gets involved. But I think it's good that the nations of the world say to everybody else, stay out of this, let the Israelis handle it. Well, we're in full support of Israel to finish this job.
All right. General Keith Kellogg, really always appreciate your time and analysis, sir. Please have a good weekend. Thank you very much. Let's go to the phones. We've got Sam calling in from Alexandria, line 5. Sam, you're on the Vince Coglianese Show. Hello, sir.
Hey, Vince. Thanks so much for having me on, and it was great listening to General Kellogg talk, and he was pretty much spot on everything. One acronym that you probably want to write down, DIME, D-I-M-E, diplomatic, information, military, and economic. Those are national strengths, points of strength. And that's what we look at, from strategic military perspective, as to what do you apply to win the battle at the end of the day. My concern on our side of the water is that, except for military, I don't have a whole lot of confidence in any of those other actions, whether it's, diplomatic, informational, or economic, particularly as you spoke of and the general indicated toward the end, the public seeing what real war is like.
Right.
We don't see that. We see fuzzed images, too graphic to show, and people say, well, I don't know what that – they leave it to the imagination. I think Bongino said it a couple of days ago, is they just need to put this stuff out there so people see the gruesomeness of what Tlaib and all those people are saying, this is what I support.
Yes.
Oh, okay. This image is what you support. Oh, okay, got it.
100%.
When it comes to urban battle, Israelis are great, but they don't want to go there. They need to starve out Gaza and level the thing. And because if we're looking, I looked it up real quick because I'm not that much of a historian. Mosul, it was about 100,000 good guys against about 10 to 20,000 bad guys. Took 9 months to retake.
It's very tough
so
fighting.
We have to think about that and what it takes. Do you really want to step foot into that city and try to clear that, starve them out, and then we use U.S. positioning to keep all the other friends in the playground.
Right, including against an enemy force that thinks suicide bombings are an appropriate way to handle things, or to detonate IEDs. We've seen it all before, and things can get very ugly very quickly. Sam, thank you. Really appreciate the call, as always, sir. Hang tight. I've got more for you. We've got more reporting out of Israel. I want to share with you a haunting piece of audio from a father grappling with the death of his child. You don't want to miss this. And I've also got some updates on news of the day, including right here in Washington, D.C. The speaker's race is still chaotic.